Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni on Thursday described gay people as deviants and called for an investigation into homosexuality as lawmakers in the conservative East African nation prepare to vote on an anti-LGBT bill. The bill, introduced earlier this month, proposes tough new penalties for same-sex relations in a country where homosexuality is already illegal, sparking criticism from human rights groups. In a State of the Nation address before lawmakers, Museveni, who has ruled Uganda since 1986, called gay people deviants. As MPs urged him to comment on the new legislation. The homosexuals are deviations from normal. Why? Is it by nature or nurture? We need to answer these questions, the 78-year-old said. We need a medical opinion on that. We shall discuss it thoroughly. Under the proposed law, anyone who engages in same-sex activity or who identifies as LGBTQ could face up to 10 years imprisonment. The bill comes as conspiracy theories accusing shadowy international forces of promoting homosexuality gain traction on social media in Uganda. Western countries should stop wasting the time of humanity by trying to impose their practices on other people, Museveni said in an address. Boycotted by all but one opposition legislator. Europeans and other groups marry cousins and near relatives. Here, marrying in one's clan is taboo. Should we impose sanctions on them for marrying relatives? This is not our job, he added. The bill is due to be discussed next week, with a vote possible as early as Tuesday. Uganda is notorious for intolerance of homosexuality, which is criminalized under colonial-era laws, and strict Christian views on sexuality in general. But since independence from Britain in 1962, there has never been a conviction for consensual same-sex activity. In 2014, Ugandan lawmakers passed a bill that called for life in prison for people caught having gay sex. A court later struck down the law on a technicality, but it had already sparked international condemnation, some Western nations freezing or redirecting millions of dollars of government aid in response. Opposition politicians boycotted Thursday's speech to protest human rights violations, particularly the illegal detention and forced disappearance of their supporters. Uganda has seen a series of crackdowns on people opposed to Museveni's rule. Journalists have been attacked, lawyers jailed, election monitors prosecuted, the internet shut down, and opposition leaders muzzled. New Uganda bill terrifies LGBTQ community. The proposed legislation to criminalize identifying as LGBTQ is already making life harder for sexual minorities in Uganda. A gay Ugandan couple cover themselves with a pride flag as they pose for a photograph in Uganda on Saturday, March 25, 2023. AP photo by Sophie Neiman. Kampala, Uganda. Frank Mugisha, a gay rights activist and executive director of Sexual Minorities Uganda, SMUG, receives hundreds of requests for help daily. People want my intervention, he said. I get so many WhatsApp messages. I want food. I can't work anymore. People know I'm LGBTQ and I can't go back. I'm worried. I need housing. People are calling. I'm being blackmailed. I'm being trailed. It's overwhelming. In the last week, these pleas have become increasingly desperate. There has always been hostility towards sexual minorities in Uganda and, indeed, in parts of East Africa, a deeply conservative region. But things have worsened after Uganda's parliament passed one of the world's strictest anti-homosexuality legislation on March 21 to sentence anyone found guilty of same-sex relations to life imprisonment, if signed into law by President Yoweri Museveni. The new bill imposes the death penalty in cases of aggravated homosexuality, defined as sexual relations with someone below the age of 14 or above the age of 75, and for repeat offenders. Activists and journalists are seemingly being targeted as well. Individuals found guilty of promoting homosexuality could spend 20 years in prison. Friends, family, and neighbors are required by law to report anyone they suspect is gay to the police, or suffer a 6-month jail term, while landlords are forbidden from renting to LGBTQ people. The bill was passed by an overwhelming majority, as parliamentarians applauded and sang the national anthem, with all but 2 of the 389 politicians present voting in favor of it. One of them, Fox Odoy Oyweloo, presented a minority report condemning the legislation, amid boos and taunts from his colleagues. If anybody still thinks that you can pass a law to lay a legal basis for hatred, which is what homophobia is, then I can't support you, he told Al Jazeera from his office in Uganda's parliament building. Many of the clauses of the bill were, to put it mildly, repugnant. But opposing this law did not come without a price for Odoi Oiweloo. There were people who called me to tell me that they will stone me, he said. There were those who called me to tell me that they will hang my children. Ugandan lawmaker John Musira dressed in an anti-gay gown gestures as he leaves the chambers during the debate of the anti-homosexuality bill in Kampala, Uganda, on March 21, 2023, Abubakar Lubowa. Reuters. Big panic. Already, anxiety is rising within the Ugandan LGBTQ community. There is a big panic, said Mugisha of SMUG, adding that members of Uganda's gay community are already making plans to flee the country. Others have stopped visiting health facilities for fear of arrest. Some have been evicted from their homes. People think that since you have a law that was passed, you already have a law that is enforced, said Adrian Jejuko, executive director of the Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum HRAPF in Kampala. Consequently, people take the law into their own hands. This, he added, is likely to lead to an increase in the number of violent assaults in a country where homophobia is entrenched. Uganda's penal code, a relic of the colonial era, currently criminalizes acts deemed against the order of nature, including same-sex relations and sodomy, but is barely enforced. An initial anti-homosexuality bill, introduced in 2009, after significant lobbying by American evangelicals, was signed into law. 5 years later, the law was overturned by the Constitutional Court on a technicality, only for members of parliament to threaten to bring it back in 2019. Because the law was discarded on procedural grounds, the possibility of a similar bill has constantly loomed over gay Ugandans. The dismissal always left appetite among members of parliament, said Claire Bayarugaba, an LGBTQ rights campaigner with Chapter 4 Uganda, a nonprofit instrumental in fighting the 2014 legislation. There are some people who are surprised that this bill has come back, but I was not. Last August, SMUG was shut down by the state-run Uganda NGO Bureau, which accused it of not being properly registered. At the time, Mugisha warned anyone who would listen that a new version of the Anti-Homosexuality Act would soon be introduced. This January, Jejuko's HRAPF, which frequently works with the LGBTQ community, was among 22 organizations listed as being under investigation in a leaked report from the NGO Bureau, with recommendations for government to comprehensively criminalize LGBTQ activities and investigate organizations promoting homosexuality. As the bureaucratic clampdown increased, homophobic attacks and rhetoric rose too. Between January and February alone, Mugisha registered 110 cases of violations nationwide against the LGBTQ community, including sexual violence, evictions, and forced public undressing. In March, Muslim leaders held a demonstration condemning homosexuality in the eastern city of Jinja. A secondary teacher was arrested in the same city, accused of encouraging her students to become lesbians. International pressure. A parliament source told Al Jazeera anonymously that an official version of the bill is expected to be sent within the next few days to Museveni, who has to sign it into law within 30 days, or send it back to Parliament for revisions. On the domestic front, there is overwhelming support for the bill. Alex Onzima, a junior minister in Museveni's cabinet who told Al Jazeera that homosexuality is worse than malignant cancer, worse than terrorism, has promised to resign if Museveni doesn't sign the bill into law. Only a few dissenting voices like Odoi Oiweloo are still calling for reason. This law was just born out of hatred, the politician told Al Jazeera. It only makes one thing legitimate: hatred. Meanwhile, foreign pressure has been ramping up on the president to reject the bill. This discriminatory bill could provide carte blanche for the systematic violation of nearly all of their human rights and serve to incite people against each other. Volker Turk, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, said in a statement, urging Museveni not to sign it. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also condemned the legislation on Twitter, saying it would undermine fundamental human rights of all Ugandans and could reverse gains in the fight against HIV/AIDS. The Open for Business Coalition, a consortium of multinational corporations dedicated to LGBTQ inclusion, penned an open letter to Museveni, appealing to him not to assent. Museveni has yet to publicly indicate his next step. But while addressing lawmakers earlier this month, he described gay people as deviants, calling on the West to stop imposing its ideals on Ugandans. Speaker of Parliament Anita Among has also hit back at criticism. "I got a lot of pressure," she told parliamentarians last week, in seeming reference to international dissenters. "We are going to change this community, this country. We are not going to be intimidated." For the Ugandan LGBTQ community, plenty of damage has already been done, regardless of whether the president signs the bill or not. Long before the bill's introduction, Mugisha said he often worried about his safety and that of his loved ones before leaving his home and ahead of choosing meeting spots. He deliberates carefully. "The fear is so exhausting that he has become numb to it. It is like I'm living life in a bulletproof vest," he told Al Jazeera. Source: Al Jazeera. Please subscribe for more interesting facts on African leaders.